We obviously talked then about the Middle East, and he wants to be helpful. I said, you could be more helpful by getting the Ukraine-Russia war over with. That would be more helpful. But we had a very good talk.
Putin should end the war in Ukraine and not meddle in the Middle East issue. Trump faces pressure from advisors to end war with Iran, and how Republicans at risk. Donald Trump team alarmed by surging oil prices. That is news next. Yes, President Donald Trump stated that Kremlin head Vladimir Putin wants to be helpful on the Middle East issue, but would be more useful if he ended the war in Ukraine, according to a White House broadcast. During his press conference, Trump was asked what he could say about the March 9th phone call with Putin and what they discussed. In response, the US leader said the conversation was very good and that there were many people on the line from both sides. One topic of the conversation was the war in Ukraine.
We were talking about Ukraine, which is just a never-ending fight. And look, there's tremendous hatred between President Putin and President Zelensky. They can't seem to get it together.
At the same time, he still believes the conversation was positive. Another topic of the negotiations was the situation in the Middle East. According to Trump, Putin wants to be helpful on this issue, but he believes the Russian dictator would be much more useful if he ended his war against Ukraine.
We obviously talked then about the Middle East, and he wants to be helpful. I said, you could be more helpful by getting the Ukraine-Russia war over with. That would be more helpful.
Summarizing, Trump added that the conversation was good and that Putin wants to act very constructively about negotiations and the end of the war in Ukraine. Since the beginning of 2026, 3 rounds of trilateral peace negotiations between Ukraine, the US, and Russia have already taken place aimed at ending the war. The parties have not yet resolved the territorial issue, particularly in the Donbass, but progress was made on other issues. In the first days of March, representatives of the 3 countries were scheduled to hold a 4th round of talks in Abu Dhabi, but the meeting was cancelled due to the conflict in the Middle East. The resumption of diplomacy was expected this week. However, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky reported on March 9th that the meeting is still being postponed due to the situation with Iran. At the same time, it is worth noting that the other day, Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff stated that work on the final documents is ongoing and that new results are expected in the coming weeks. US President Donald Trump stated that he will strike Iran 20 times stronger if Tehran tries to stop oil supplies through the Strait of Hormuz, according to his post on Truth Social.
If Iran does anything that stops the flow of oil within the Strait of Hormuz, they will be hit by the United States of America, 20 times harder than they have been hit thus far.
He added that besides this, the US will destroy easily accessible targets that would make Iran's recovery practically impossible. Death, fire and fury will rain upon them, but I hope and pray that it does not happen, the post reads. Trump called his warnings the US's gift to China and all countries that actively use the Strait of Hormuz. The American president expressed hope that this gesture would be highly appreciated. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the world's most important energy choke points, through which approximately 1/5 of global oil supplies pass. China and a number of other Asian economies depend on supplies of crude oil and natural gas via this waterway, which has been practically closed since the start of the US operation against Iran. What are the threats of blocking the Strait of Hormuz? Iran, in response to the US and Israel's operation, has practically blocked the Strait of Hormuz. As of the morning of March 9th, vessel traffic through it had decreased by 90%. In addition, on the same day, Brent crude exceeded $115 per barrel. Against this backdrop, US President Donald Trump suggested that the war against Iran is close to completion, after which oil prices went down. At the same time, the IRGC issued an ultimatum to European and Arab countries. According to the statement, Iran will allow free passage through the strait, but on the condition that the countries expel the ambassadors of Israel and the US from their territories. A number of advisors to US President Donald Trump have urged him to seek an exit plan from the war against Iran. This is happening against the backdrop of rising oil prices and fears that a protracted conflict will have a negative political impact, reports the Wall Street Journal. On Monday, speaking to journalists, Trump characterized the military mission as largely achieving its goals. He did not give a clear timeline for ending the war against Iran, but said the mission would end very soon. Some Trump administration officials said that as long as Tehran continues to attack countries in the region and as long as Israel still wants to strike Iranian targets, the US is unlikely to be able to exit the war easily. A source also says that Trump will not stop fighting until he can declare a convincing victory, especially when the US has a military advantage. Several other people familiar with Trump's way of thinking said he sometimes wondered why Tehran does not surrender despite the ongoing joint US-Israel operation. Why is Trump being urged to end the war? The Wall Street Journal notes that in recent days, Trump has made various contradictory statements regarding the war. For example, last week he said he was seeking the unconditional surrender of Iran and also refused to rule out the possibility of sending ground troops to Iran. At the same time, in an interview with the New York Times, he said he was far from issuing such an order. On Monday, Trump spoke of a possible quick end to the war, but added that the US could go further, emphasizing that it would go further. In addition, the president publicly hinted and told aides in private conversation that he would support the killing of the younger Khamenei, Iran's new supreme leader, if he turned out to be unwilling to comply with US demands. All these comments from Trump came against the backdrop of a sharp rise and then fall in oil prices, which intensified the already existing concern among Trump's allies about the economic cost and political consequences of the war. Meanwhile, sources say that in recent days, some of Trump's advisors have urged him to formulate the plan for the US to exit the war and to demonstrate that the military has largely achieved its goals. And although many of the president's conservative electorate still support the initial operation, some advisors have privately expressed concerns that a prolonged war could undermine this support. According to sources, Trump has been briefed on the results of some polls regarding the war, which showed that the majority of Americans oppose the war. The Wall Street Journal also learned that in recent days, Trump's team has concluded that a more aggressive communication plan is needed to convince the public of the necessity of the war, as many consumers are facing rising gasoline prices. The Wall Street Journal notes that some of the president's advisors watched with alarm as oil prices soared to over $100 per barrel. In addition, they received calls from a number of Republicans who were concerned about this against the backdrop of the midterm congressional elections. About operation that may be coming to an end. Tonight, US President Donald Trump stated that the operation of the US and Israel against Iran is a short-term action. According to him, victory has largely already been achieved. He emphasized, "We have already won in many ways, but we haven't won enough. We go forward more determined than ever to achieve ultimate victory that will end this long-running danger once and for all." Incidentally, to stabilize the market after the effective blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, the US has allowed at least India to temporarily purchase Russian oil. Over the weekend, Washington said that the policy of sanctions against the Russian Federation has not changed, but further relaxations regarding oil may still be possible. Tonight, Trump effectively confirmed that he may lift some sanctions on Russia permanently. According to him, the US is currently easing sanctions against some countries, which may not have to be reimposed. The consequences of the rise in oil prices caused by the war in Iran have negatively affected the standard of living of people in the US who were already dissatisfied with it. This refers to gasoline prices, according to CNN. About consequences for the US, oil prices jumped sharply amid the escalation of the war in Iran. For the first time since 2022, black gold prices exceeded $100 per barrel. US oil futures rose nearly 15%, and the benchmark Brent crude rose more than 12% to around $104 per barrel. The increase in oil prices quickly affected gasoline prices in the U.S. As we said, according to the American Automobile Association, the average price of gasoline in the country reached $3.48 per gallon, which is about 16% higher than a week ago. Trump reassures Americans. Yes, President Donald Trump stated on the social network Truth Social that the rise in energy prices is a small price to pay for security. He wrote that short-term oil prices were a very small price to pay for the security and peace of the U.S. and the world. The head of the White House also expressed confidence that the price increase will be temporary. About Trump's entourage panics. However, as the CNN writes, the Trump administration is looking for a way out of the situation caused by rising oil prices. This was especially important for the current U.S. leader's election campaign, as gasoline prices needed to be favorable. CNN writes that this indicator could indeed affect the social mood in the U.S., as Americans are already dissatisfied with their standard of living. Also causing concern in Trump's entourage is the situation in the Strait of Hormuz, a key route for global energy trade. About a fifth of the world's oil supplies pass through it, so any tax or shipping restrictions immediately affect global prices. Against the backdrop of the escalating conflict in Iran, oil prices rose to nearly $120 per barrel at times before falling back somewhat. The US administration believes that the price spike may be short-term if the conflict does not escalate into a wider war in the Middle East. Incidentally, Trump even suggested seizing the Strait of Hormuz, which once again confirms the experts' opinion that the war in Iran needs to be ended because it is the only way to lower oil prices. That's all for today. Thanks for watching this video. Support Ukraine, like and subscribe.